On August 7, 2025, the Supreme Court struck down the Trump administration's Patriot Tariff framework, declaring it an unconstitutional overreach. The plan aimed to impose a 60% tariff on Chinese imports and a 10% baseline on others, but the court emphasized the separation of powers. This decision redefined presidential power in international trade, a domain traditionally balanced between Congress and the White House. The ruling neutralized the threat of a trade war but left unresolved economic anxieties. Industries adjusted supply chains and markets reacted with relief, yet uncertainty loomed. The court's decision was a legal answer, not an economic one, leaving the debate over America's global economic role wide open. Wall Street rallied briefly, while international partners welcomed the affirmation of a rules-based trading order. Within the U.S., responses varied. Industries reliant on global supply chains sighed in relief, while those seeking protection felt abandoned. The path forward is now an open field, moving the debate from the White House to Congress and boardrooms. The decision doesn't erase the underlying economic challenges that fueled the tariff proposal. The court's ruling was a legal answer, but it did not provide an economic one. The debate over America's place in the global economy has been blown wide open. The Supreme Court's decision focused on who holds the power to tax and regulate commerce with foreign nations. The majority opinion argued that existing trade laws were never meant to support such a broad tariff regime. The proposed tariffs were seen as legislative acts, not executive ones, reserved for Congress under the Commerce Clause. The court ruled that the administration was bypassing Congress, setting a dangerous precedent for future executive overreach. The dissenting justices argued for a more expansive view of presidential authority, citing modern economic challenges. The Supreme Court's decision brought relief to financial markets, with the Dow Jones jumping over 500 points. The administration's plan was seen as a recipe for recession, with a 60% tariff on Chinese goods acting as a massive tax. The court's decision removes one proposed solution but doesn't offer an alternative, leaving the nation in policy limbo. Businesses face new calculations, unsure whether to continue costly investments or rely on global supply chains. The ruling averts an immediate crisis but doesn't solve chronic economic problems. The core challenge is crafting a trade policy that fosters growth without triggering retaliatory measures. The uncertainty is a significant economic headwind, stifling investment and growth. Companies need clarity on future trade rules to make long-term plans. The nation has stepped back from the cliff's edge but is now wandering in a thick fog. The ruling forces a more nuanced approach to trade and industrial policy. The debate over America's economic future is now more urgent than ever. The path forward requires bipartisan consensus, something in short supply. The Supreme Court's decision sent a wave of cautious optimism through global capitals. The European Union welcomed the ruling as a victory for the rules-based international order, avoiding a transatlantic trade war. For China, the ruling provides a temporary reprieve, forcing both sides to reconsider strategies. The decision preserves the viability of integrated production networks crucial for many U.S. industries. However, the global economic system isn't simply snapping back to its pre-2025 state. The episode exposed the fragility of global trade relationships, accelerating a trend toward regional supply chains. Other countries are now more likely to pursue their own industrial policies and form regional trading blocs. The Supreme Court blocked this specific tariff plan, but the debate it ignited has altered the global conversation. The era of unchecked globalization is likely over, replaced by a more cautious approach to international commerce. The ruling forces a reconsideration of strategies, leading to more targeted competition. The decision de-escalated a brewing confrontation, reaffirming a commitment to resolving trade disputes through established channels. The ruling takes the most extreme weapon off the table, but underlying tensions remain. The global conversation on trade has shifted, with a focus on resilience and regionalism. The Supreme Court's rejection of the tariff plan created clear winners and losers among American industries. Sectors reliant on global supply chains like the automotive and consumer electronics industries are immediate beneficiaries. Retailers also dodged a bullet, avoiding massive price hikes for consumers. On the flip side, industries like steel and aluminum, which sought protection from foreign competition, feel abandoned. The agricultural sector is relieved to avoid retaliatory tariffs but remains concerned about trade relationships. The decision underscores a fundamental cleavage in the American economy, with competing regional and industrial interests. The ruling benefits coastal economies and multinational corporations, but is a setback for the industrial Midwest. The path forward requires targeted investments and support for struggling sectors. The decision highlights the complexity of trade policy with no single national interest. The ruling prevents a repeat of past trade disputes, but leaves underlying economic anxieties unaddressed. The decision forces policymakers to find ways to support losing sectors without resorting to protectionism. The economic divergence is a source of deep political tension, requiring collaboration and foresight. The Supreme Court's decision directly impacts American wallets, preventing significant price increases on everyday goods. A 10% tariff on most imports and a 60% tariff on Chinese goods would have been passed to consumers. The court's decision prevents this inflation, keeping prices stable and benefiting American families. The argument for tariffs was that short-term pain would lead to long-term gains in American jobs. The rejection of tariffs means consumers benefit from low prices, but domestic manufacturing challenges persist. The nation's supply chains remain centered in other countries, leaving the U.S. vulnerable to global disruptions. The decision presents a choice: low consumer prices versus industrial decline and supply chain vulnerability. The ruling forces a reconsideration of trade policy, balancing global engagement with domestic resilience. The decision highlights the complexity of trade-offs, with different Americans reaching different conclusions. The Supreme Court's ruling ignited a political firestorm, pitting the executive branch against the judiciary. The White House condemned the decision as judicial activism, rallying the president's base. This confrontation raises questions about the separation of powers and the rule of law. The administration's response challenges the legitimacy of the Supreme Court as the final arbiter of constitutional questions. The political fallout will dominate the national conversation, with the ruling serving as a central flashpoint. Economists are divided on the best path forward after the Supreme Court's decision. One camp argues for doubling down on free trade, while another advocates for strategic trade policy. The free trade school emphasizes the benefits of open markets, while the industrial policy advocates see flaws in the pre-existing consensus. The role of China is a key point of contention, with differing views on how to handle its economic challenge. The debate is not just academic, it impacts how the U.S. positions itself against global rivals. The data supports both sides, highlighting the benefits of globalization and the costs of industrial displacement. The Supreme Court's decision has not resolved this tension, forcing a more serious debate on alternatives. The consensus of the past is broken, but a new one has yet to be forged. The ruling forces a reconsideration of trade policy, balancing global engagement with domestic resilience. The decision highlights the complexity of trade-offs, with different Americans reaching different conclusions. The Supreme Court's rejection of the tariff plan marks a pivotal moment for the U.S. The decision averts an economic crisis but leaves underlying economic discontent unaddressed. The ruling forces a fundamental debate about America's economic identity and strategy. The blunt instrument of tariffs is off the table, necessitating a more nuanced approach. The decision pushes economic questions back to Congress, corporations, and the American people. The path forward requires collaboration, foresight, and a willingness to move beyond simplistic slogans. The chapter on the Patriot Tariff is closed, but the book on America's economic future remains open. The nation stands at a crossroads, with globalization and protectionism both appearing as dead ends. The challenge is to chart a new course, balancing global engagement with domestic resilience. The central question looms: what is the right and sustainable formula for American prosperity?